Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so grateful that you were all inviting us into your homes virtually this evening. I'm Allie Wright. I'm not Joe Javich, as you probably can tell. I'm the program assistant for the Georgia Center for the Book. Joe is not able to be with us tonight, so we're going to have fun, and you're going to have me, and it's going to be great. It has been a crazy year, and one that has made us even more in awe of our audience and our patrons, and so thankful for your continued support of our virtual programming. We have our final virtual event of 2020 this Friday. It is a celebration for Lillian Smith's birthday. I believe it's her 123rd birthday. So we hope you'll join us for that. We will be sharing an encore presentation of Breaking the Silence, the Lillian Smith documentary. And then we will have an absolutely wonderful panel with some new people just talking about Lillian's work and her legacy and the importance of this author in this time. The panel includes Matt Tush of the Lillian Smith Center. It includes Sue Ellen Lovejoy, who is Lillian's grandniece. It includes Rose Gladney, who is one of the editors for the Lillian Smith Reader, and some more people. It's just going to be a fabulous conversation. So you can join at 7 on Friday and watch the documentary with us on Zoom, or you can join at 8 and just join for the conversation if you've seen the documentary before. Either way, find more information about that on our Facebook and on our website, and we hope we'll see you then. That event is in conjunction with Revival Lost Southern Voices, which is our wonderful conference that we are helping host, that has been moved to 2021. So stay tuned for more information about that. I'm going to just turn it over to John and Carol and let them get started. Raven Wake's World is a great book for this time of year. It's being celebrated as a holiday book, a winter tale. And I think, I've got my wintry background. She's got her cover, as you can see. And I think it's going to be great. We're going to hear about the book. We're going to hear about the illustrations. And so thank you guys for being here. I'll pop back on to do the Q&A in a while, but let's get this event started. You'll see me plenty.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Adcox. I'm the author of Raven Makes the World, along with my beloved wife, Carol, who is the illustrator and designer. Now, funny thing about this book, it actually started out as a gift that we were doing for our friends. We did a much shorter version of it, and Carol did the illustrations for that, and we bound them by hand and gave them to our friends. And then many years later, I pitched the idea of doing a collection of the stories that we did to the amazing Lou Aronica, who is my editor at the Story Plant. And Lou suggested that what I call a short story, everybody else in the world would call a novel. My stuff tends to be a little bit on the longish side. So we did a little bit of re-editing and a little bit of expanding, and now my short story has been published as a novel. So copies are available even as we speak at your favorite local bookstore or online. And Eagle Eye Bookshop over in Decatur is the co-sponsor and co-host of this event. So if you pick up a copy there and you'd like us to sign it, then by all means, please let us know, and we'd be happy to go over to Eagle Eye and sign the copies that you guys have purchased. By the way, I think that Lou Aronica's group at the Story Plant did an absolutely amazing job, because it's a really, really, really beautiful book. It's a little bitty hardcover, gift size, and I'm so proud of the job they did bringing Carol's vision and design to life. Carol, do you want to talk a little bit about the design before I read?
I think I can just say a little bit about it. So, and then I've got a few things to say after. Like, I think I'll walk through it after. But yeah, so I guess the fun part is John and I wanted to have a creative project to work on together. And he's a writer, I can be an artist. And so we just cooked up these holiday stories, and it was a lot of fun. We'd sort of play with different ideas. We tried it at different ways for a couple of years. Like, the way in which we started with the concepts and the way in which we developed them, we just tried it a couple of different ways, and it was just a real fun way to do something original, and then just have like a cool thing to give to our friends. And so this is an example of like the first one. And so we went all out. We went sort of like high concept on like rivet bindings and different papers and things like that. And that was like pretty labor intensive as I remember. But and then for for later ones we discovered the spiral bound, which was a little bit easier than like
Fantastic
hand
times.
binding. Yeah, yeah. But it was a really fun thing to do, and so I'm really happy that John and Lou have kind of like developed it even further. So for the book, we took the page design just a step further, which I can talk about a little bit later, and punched up a couple of the illustrations. And then I did a cover design, which I will 100% out front say this is clip art. So the time given for cover design was like, I'm just buying clip art. That's how that's going to happen. But we tried to be reminiscent of the original hand-bound book. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the illustrations and design after John reads, and hope you like it.
Thanks, everybody. So I've always been a great believer in the power of mythology to tell us things about our lives that we might not intuit otherwise. Stories are wisdom, and they tell us things about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be alive. I also think there's a possibility that stories can heal us, and other people's stories can heal us sometimes in ways that our own stories cannot. So that was sort of what led to Raven Wakes the World. Carol also had a friend who we knew was living on an island off the coast of Alaska. I later met Carol's friend, and neither she nor her island are anything at all like what's presented in the book. One of the reviewers was talking about how I had evoked the real Alaska. No, my Alaska is basically Narnia. I made everything up. So there is no real Alaska in here. But it's a mythic space and a space where story happens. So this is Raven Makes the World. I'll read the first chapter, and if I'm off, if you guys want to hear more, I'll read chapter 2 as well, because the chapters are really, really, really short. It starts with an epigraph that says, "In the earliest time, when both people and animals lived on the earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. Sometimes they were people and sometimes animals, and there was no difference. All spoke the same language. That was the time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive, and what people wanted to happen would happen. All you had to do was say it. Nobody can explain this. That's just the way it was." That's from Edward Field, who wrote Songs and Stories of the Netsilik Eskimos. Chapter 1, All the World Was White. It was cold, and all the world was white. Snow covered the stony island, and from where Katie Mason stood, the icy landscape blended into the overcast winter sky, white melding into frigid white, without shape, distance, or horizon. It was the white of a barren campus, or fallow stone, art stillborn. The only change from the stunning, melancholy monotony of white was a single blackbird, a large crow, a raven maybe, that circled overhead once, twice, and 3 times before winging away over the still sea toward the frozen rocks of the mainland. "I wish he'd stayed," Katie said aloud, her syllables disappearing in a cloud of frost. "I could use some damn company." The mist carried her words away, and then they were lost. She pulled her winter coat more tightly around her. She wished she'd worn a second shirt beneath her sweater. The wind had teeth. She didn't shiver. She was too numb for motion. She should be moving, she knew that. But she stood still, like a statue shaped from ice. She'd planned to take the boat to the mainland and then drive into town. She would need supplies soon. Soon, nothing. She needed them yesterday. Coffee and wine, food and paint. Well, not paint. Not really. She had plenty of paint. She really should start moving. Down to the boat, across to the truck. One step, then another. Who knew? Maybe the new chisel set she'd ordered would be in. Maybe if she had the new tools, the novelty would spark excitement, and the excitement would flare into passion. Passion. That's what she needed. Then maybe she'd be able to sculpt again. Maybe. But it was so cold, so terribly cold, and the wind reached through her heaviest coat and sweaters to chill her blood and frost the very marrow of her bones. Maybe it would be warmer tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow would be soon enough. She could go into town then. She went back inside. The cabin's great room was to have been her studio. After all, she'd come all the way up here to Alaska, to the very end of the world, to work and to heal. As a studio space, it should have been perfect. It was quiet. The room was large and airy, at least by local standards, and the windows looked to the east. They were small, true, but when there was light, they let it in. The overheads were white but not too harsh, and they cast few shadows. Her tools and brushes were arranged just the way she liked them. The room had no sink, but that was okay. The kitchen waited just through the door, and the sink was a giant steel industrial one. Katie didn't mind walking a little while she worked. She hadn't used to anyway. She hadn't done any work, though, nothing more than a few false starts and aborted attempts. Here and there, the project she'd begun, or planned to, waited, still lost in barren stone or empty canvas. Sheets of glacier white canvas, stretched in frames, glared accusations at her. Blocks of stone and plaster, with just a few chips chiseled away, lingered. Children neither born nor aborted, the shapes and form of the art still frozen in slabs of unmoving white. Only one showed any recognizable sign of creation at all. She'd begun a statue, but her efforts had revealed only a single arm, fingers curled and grasping, like the limb of a drowning man reaching desperately for life from beneath the surface of an ice-covered northern sea. Katie stood still and looked at it for a long time. She should work on that one, she decided. Or something, anyway. She needed to work. When she was making, she wasn't thinking about Billy. Katie sat down at a work table, one where the sunlight was more or less good even in the Alaska winter. It would be pale bright for a little while longer. But she only gazed at the white marble, studying the swirls and textures like the ink in a Rorschach blot. The shapes hidden within eluded her. She could not free them from the stillness of stone. She never even reached for a tool. So paint then, damn it, she commanded herself. You're a bloody artist. Bloody create something. She didn't bother with any of the efforts she'd started before. Instead, she stretched a new canvas and put up a frame. When she finished, when it was ready for her at last, she saw that it was white and pure and perfect, like a field of new snow, so very lovely in its desolate, pristine emptiness. She couldn't bring herself to touch it, to spoil its empty virgin ice perfection. Her heart was numb. If only it weren't so cold. An hour passed before she gave up. She poured herself a mug of Irish mist, pulled her favorite chair to the window where she could catch the last of the dim, fading, fatal light, and stared at the pages of a book. She tried not to think about Billy. After two more Irish mists, she almost succeeded. That much, at least, was good. If she wasn't healing, at least she wasn't hurting. The pain lay still, numb in her breast. That was enough. When night came, she went to bed. After 3 more days, she found herself out of everything. She'd finished the last of the milk more than a week ago. The bottles of wine and Irish mist were empty. Even the last can of SpaghettiOs was gone. Katie hated SpaghettiOs. She'd purchased the cans out of habit. She used to keep them in the house for Billy. I like the kind with meatballs, he'd said one time as he helped her unpack her plastic bags. Katie had done the shopping in those days. Billy didn't like to go to the store, not even to the new Stop and Shop with the scan it yourself checkout lanes. He said it embarrassed him to be there when she paid for everything because he never had any money. Katie thought it made him feel, well, humiliated that she had money, even though he never actually said so, and even though she never had very much, especially not when she had buy two. Your stuff's so much more commercial than mine, he told her. My art confronts people, you know? Yeah, it's like a punch. He smacked his left palm with his right fist for emphasis. Smack! Right in the gut. You know? It makes them uncomfortable. That's why they won't buy it. Maybe if you finish your series, Katie had suggested softly. Do your show, right, baby? Let them just see. Billy looked at her and rolled his eyes. I'm not commercial. I'm not like you. I'm moved by a muse, not by money. Muses don't work on goddamn deadlines. You know? Christ, babe, what's wrong with you? Why can't you even see that? Katie had felt very small. He tried to be gentle, but she'd heard the accusation in his voice and the contempt, just like when she'd unpacked the SpaghettiOs. They were out of the meatball ones, honey, Katie had explained. I looked. Okay? Look, I got the ones with the little hot dogs. Can't you eat those just this once? Or here, let me make us something. Billy hadn't answered. Baby, I did my best. Okay? Maybe you could come with me next time. Then you can pick out what you like. Okay? Honestly, Katie, sometimes I think you do these things just to belittle me. He shook his head and walked away. He'd sulked for the rest of the week. That was before, a lifetime ago. Billy was gone now, and she was in Alaska, and she'd still bought the stupid cans, the ones with meatballs. Now even they were gone. So was the last of the coffee. Worse, the roof had started to leak again, and snow whirled in to settle like dust on the cold stones and barren canvases she hadn't even begun to make into art. So that's the first chapter. I can read one more if you'd like, or we could turn it over to Carol. You think one more?
Sure, read one more. We got read another chapter coming in the chat, so let's go for it.
We'll do it. Okay. This is chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called The Memory of a Winter Dream. After 2 more days, Katie finally went to town, Aurora, Alaska, nestled just a few miles north and inland from the last port where the cruises called. A few of the braver tourists looking for the true northern adventure made their way there, so the town obliged them by putting up authentic Alaskan wilderness lodges, complete with jacuzzis and steakhouses, and a few shops and galleries selling authentic Eskimo art and crafts, some of it actually made by Inuit Native Americans. Already decked out in its holiday finery, Aurora displayed itself like a toy village in a crystal snow globe, or a town in a Christmas card, or the memory of a winter dream too bright and lovely to be real. Katie couldn't help but gasp and smile at the wonder of the town's winter charm as she pulled into the parking lot across from Tall Bear's general store and gallery. The few spaces there were full, so she pulled out to find a spot along the street. Main Street detoured around the Aurora Town Square. There, the tall pine in the center twinkled with sparkling color, silver and gold, and a bright galaxy of delicate ornaments hung shining beneath a star blazing on the highest bough. Every shop, building, and lamppost along Main Street had been decorated with garlands of greenery and sparkling white lights, and the windows and doorways wore proud red ribbons beneath wreaths and blinking electric candles. Winter contributed too. Every single bow, bough, and ornament was dusted with snow and hung with icicles. Only the occasional spots of coal black, interspersed in shop windows, doorways, and even on the Christmas tree, seemed oddly out of place, at least to Katie's artist's eye. As she passed, she looked closer. All of the night black figures were stylized ravens set among the golden angels and jolly snowmen. She braked, wiped the frost away from her side window with her mitten, and looked again. Her brow crinkled. Ravens? Shaking her head, Katie drove on. A little further ahead, she found a parking space on Main Street, right in front of a row of shops across and two short blocks down from Tall Bear's general store. Tall Bear's was her destination, but Katie lingered, walking slowly, looking in the windows of the souvenir galleries. Rows of tiny carvings, stone fetishes, looked back at her. Were those Inuit? Katie had seen them back in Boston. Katie wondered what the artist had thought as they crafted them. Had they felt totem spirits stirring in the unshaped rock, waiting to be freed? Or were they just filling orders, crafting myth forms like crystal unicorns, simply to make a few dollars? In the back of her mind, she heard Billy sniff derisively. Commercial. Behind them, Katie saw a display of paintings, tall canvases depicting winter scenes in acrylic, oil, and watercolor. When she turned her head to the side, she thought she could see animal shapes lurking in the shadows and forms of line and color, where sea met rock and ice. Had the artist placed them there? Or were they simply tricks of light and imagination? She found herself rather hoping the latter. It would be good to be imagining things again. Her mind had been cold for a long time. The next window featured watercolors of Alaska natives, stern, dark-eyed faces in winter gear, few of them smiling. Katie frowned. The other shop had been better. The art in Tallbear's would be better still, light years better. But people bought the pictures here just the same. She saw a couple making a purchase even as she watched. I could sell here, Katie told herself. I could make a living. When she'd first come to Aurora, she'd sold two paintings and a bust. They were all of Billy. She had no idea why she'd brought them along. She'd come here to forget, to heal, and to leave the relationship and its bitter, broken end behind. When Maggie Tallbear offered to display them in the gallery adjoining her shop, she jumped at the chance. When they'd sold, she'd been delighted, thrilled even. But she'd created those three pieces long ago, in summer, a time of warmth and smiles when the world was green, except when the last light turned it to softly shining gold. She'd missed the pieces at first. The empty places were like missing teeth that she kept probing with her tongue, even when she told herself not to. But over time, the pain chilled to a dumb numbness deep in the belly, a hollow place in heart and womb. Mrs. Tallbear had asked for more than once, but oops, but Katie hadn't made anything new in months. It was winter now, and cold. Over time, the bubbling excitement had numbed to apathy. Maybe in the spring, she thought, things would thaw then, and it wouldn't be so awfully, achingly cold. She chewed her lower lip, which was chapped in the cold wind. The couple left with their wrapped package, laughing and touching. They were from out of town. Already, Katie had been in Aurora long enough to spot the tourists. They looked happy. Why on earth would happy people come here? She wondered. Why would they come all the way to the end of the world where it's so damn cold? For a moment, she didn't move. She looked at the art in the frosted windows even after she'd stopped seeing it. At last, after a few minutes or several, she couldn't have guessed how many, she shook her head. Enough, she told herself. She had errands. Holding her coat closed against the wind and snow, she hurried across the street to Tallbear's. Silver Bales jingled as she opened the door and slipped inside. She found the store surprisingly crowded. Mrs. Tallbear hurried this way and that to deal with customers, while a line of tourists waited in front of the register. Katy shuddered. Crowds, even small ones, unnerved her. They always had, even when she'd had to go to the Stop and Shop for Billy's SpaghettiOs, but especially lately. She waited for a few minutes, standing still and trying to make herself small. Katie's stomach rumbled. She was hungry, she realized. She should eat something. Didn't they always say never to shop for groceries when you're hungry? She could always come back to the store later. Christ, later, yes, when the crowd was gone. She glanced at her watch. The pub should be open. She didn't think it closed between lunch and dinner like some of the other places. She decided to go have a bite. Why not? She could be listless at the pub as well as she could anywhere else. Maybe when she returned, the store would be empty. Besides, the diversion would delay Maggie Tallbear's inevitable questions about her art, for a little while anyway. Plus, if she ate in town, her groceries would last one lunch longer. That would make one more day before she had to trudge all the way back to Aurora for more supplies, which meant one more day in which she might actually make something for Mrs. Tallbear's shop. And if she didn't, well, that meant one more day before she'd have to face her disappointed, reproving gaze again. The snow fell harder, and she left the shop to walk beneath constellations of twinkling Christmas lights that crisscrossed over the streets on wires, while an unkindness of ravens danced and twirled around her, a swirling maelstrom of black and frozen white. Sam's old Stonewall pub was just a block or two away, wasn't it? For a moment, Katy stopped and turned around, disoriented. She looked one way, then the other. In the snow, the streets looked the same. Choosing a direction more or less at random, she cut down an alley and across a snow covered parking lot. She frowned. Shouldn't the pub be here? Had she made a wrong turn? How could she? Aurora only had 6 streets. But no, there it was, just around the corner, a few doors down. She'd missed the chalkboard specials menu, which hadn't changed in decades, and the wooden sign both in the snow. The cold numbed her cheek and bleached away the last of her blush. Katy hurried and across and pushed the heavy open door open. She closed her eyes and breathed, relieved to escape the blasting cold and the optical overload of dervishing snow and spinning color as she stepped into the pub's dark and warmth. She closed the door firmly behind her, hushing the wind. This late in the afternoon, most of the lunch crowd had gone. New Sam himself stood behind the bar, chatting with the only other customer as he finished a steaming bowl of Sam's special chili and a mug of foamy red ale. New Sam's name wasn't really Sam, it was Jim. But the pub's name was Sam's, and the pub was his. Nor was there anything apparently new about the swarthy faced, white haired, long bearded old man. But the Aurora locals started calling him New Sam as soon as he took over running the pub from his grandfather, the first Sam. All these long winters later, everyone still called him New Sam, even after most of them had long since forgotten why. Katy sat down on the last stool at the other end of the bar, the one farthest from the other customer. It was also the farthest from the fireplace, but that didn't bother her. Even at the distance, the warmth from the crackling little blaze melted away the ice from her buttons and brought life back to her cold fingers, enough so that she could pull off her coat. Once free, she placed it carefully on the stool next to her. The cold reached her again, but it wasn't as bad. She hardly noticed it anymore. Cold had become a part of her. Her heart's blood was frost, and warmth was a long ago, unfamiliar thing. She felt very small on the big stool. That feeling, that sudden sensation of intense smallness, coupled with her hunger, to make her feel altogether insubstantial. She felt like a ghost, like a cloud that might drift away with the merest puff of bitter winter wind, to be lost forever in snow and sky. A part of her liked that idea, to escape, to see the world from above, distant and small, like a painting hung too far away to see its individual brushstrokes, to study it from on high before she disappeared into endless, empty blue. She didn't float away, though. Instead, she studied the menu spelled out neatly on the chalkboard behind the bar. Don't bother with that, New Sam told her with a smile. For a moment, Katie panicked. She'd forgotten he could see her. She was a woman, not a spirit or a cloud. All we have is chili, New Sam continued, and all my pots and pans are in the washer, so there's nothing else till dinner time. He shrugged. So it's chili or wait a couple of hours. Katie frowned. Chili? She planned on something lighter, like a salad maybe, even though she hadn't eaten anything more than crackers in a day or two. But chili was so substantial. It was fire that made her legs heavy and anchored her to the ground like stone, bones of the world, or the roots of a tree. It's really good chili. Katie turned around, startled. The other customer, the man at the end of the bar, had spoken. He smiled at her. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to make you jump. But it is good chili. Warm and hearty. Good and spicy, but not too hot. Peppery. No beans to ruin it. Katie looked over at the man, giving him more than a glance for the first time. At once, her artist's eye began to stir. His hair fell long and straight and shiny black, framing native Inuit features. But his face wasn't round like most of the locals. It was long and sharp, a face of edge and angles, and his eyes were a deep and bright black, like the patches of sky between stars. For a moment, Katie wished she had a sketchbook. She longed to capture that face, to hold it, to make it into art. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten. She hadn't experienced it since Billy. She looked quickly away. I can add some beans if you want 'em, said New Sam. Got a pot going, with a little chili juice to flavor 'em. If you need beans, that is. Better without 'em, the other customer said. But have New Sam here add you some cheddar. I'll have the chili, she said softly. Beans? New Sam asked. No, thank you, said Katie. Good choice, said New Sam with a nod. Don't forget the cheddar, the other customer suggested. The cheddar comes with it, said New Sam. You can sprinkle it on or not. Up to you. Want something to drink? What? So many choices, so many questions to answer. Katie had been on her own for a long time. She'd forgotten what it was like, the frenetic vibrancy of even the simplest casual human contact. She'd forgotten how many demands there were in conversation with strangers. She longed for the familiar comfort of solitude. She wished she could go home again with a blanket. She wished she could curl up in a cocoon and sleep. You seem a little lightheaded, New Sam said, not unkindly. So maybe not a beer, eh? Not on an empty stomach. I got sodas or water. How about that? Or hey, how about some coffee? The coffee's good. No, it's not, said the man at the end of the bar. It's hot, New Sam said defensively. It ought to be, the other man said with a grin. It's been on the stove since what? Yesterday? Last week? The man was handsome, Katie noticed. He was lean and strong, like Billy. But this man liked to grin. The smile was as much a part of him as the color of his eyes. She wondered what Billy would have looked like if he had smiled more. It probably would have ruined the sullen, bitter artist look he cultivated so carefully, she decided. since he'd never actually produced anything in the time they'd been together. That moody, cynical persona was just about all that let him hang on to his claim of being an artist. So, how long's that brew been cooking, anyhow? The man's words snapped her thoughts away from Billy and the past. She was glad. The pain had begun to creep up on her again, a little anyway, and she felt suddenly warm. Since lunchtime, Sam said. He glared and shook his finger at the other man. Now hush up, Luke. You're going to drive my customer away. Besides, said the man, hot coffee's no good with hot chili. You need something cold, cool and hot together. That's just the thing. Like the cheddar. He wasn't just handsome, Katie decided. No, he was more than handsome. He was beautiful. Opposites are always best, aren't they? He seemed to expect an answer, but Katie didn't know what to say. That's why twilight's the prettiest time of day, isn't it? When the sky turns that deep purple color. You know, it's night and day all mixed together, like a potion. But hey, don't listen to me. I'm keeping you from ordering. I'll have water. Katie looked down again. Coming up, said New Sam. He disappeared back into the kitchen area behind the bar. Hi, said the other man. Katie looked up, startled. What? The man smiled again, still looking at her. Hi, he repeated. His smile widened. Here, I've been helping you order your lunch and all, and I haven't even said hello. Hello. Katie was confused. The man seemed to want something from her, didn't he? Why else would he talk to her? Why couldn't he just let her be insubstantial? Couldn't he see that she wanted to float away like winter mist? I'm Lucas Tolucum, the man said. God, but he was beautiful. No man had any right to be that beautiful. I'm Katie Mason, she said, a sound something between a squeak and a whisper when her voice returned to her. Her blush made her cheeks warm. New Sam brought her a tall glass of water without ice and a bowl of steaming chili with cheddar on the side and a hunk of warm bread. The bread's fresh, New Sam promised. Just made a few loaves for the dinner crowd. Katie ate some of the chili, trying it both with and without the cheese, and nibbled at the bread, then paid her tab as fast as she could. She didn't wait for her change. She didn't look back at Lucas either, nor did she answer when he called out her friendly, See you later, Katie. She hurried away and escaped back into the cold where the wind and snow numbed her to calmness again. And that's the end of chapter 2. So, Carol, would you like to talk about the illustrations now?
Sure. Thanks. It's always fun to hear you read that. So I just put together a few thoughts about the illustrations, and I will share my screen. I think screen sharing needs to be turned back on again, if we can do that.
I'll do it, sorry.
Thank you.
Done.
Thanks. Let's see if I can get this over here.
It's worth the wait, y'all. The illustrations are really spectacular.
Can you see just a title slide?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess part of 2020 is just sort of enjoying memes. So I wanted to share how we started, how it's going. It's been really a fun process of going from what was a kind of just a personal, creative, fun project and turning it into something that is more solid, and there's a chance you could walk into a bookstore and like see it on a shelf, which is a very exciting place to be. So thanks to everybody involved with that. It's been a lot of fun. So just to share a couple of the illustrations in it, it's I guess the thinking was, Katie's an artist, and so I thought, well, what would Katie sketch if she were sketching? So I wanted to have just a pencil sketchbook look to it, and just picked out a few things in the story that I thought were important moments, or sort of, would translate well into just a nice moment to notice. And most of them are pretty straightforward in terms of, composition or style. And then I would say that with the raven, the circular raven waking the world, I did go back and do a little bit of research for more traditional Inuit imagery, as an homage. And I'm not sure I have a whole lot more to say about the illustrations, but there they are, and I hope you enjoy them.
Somebody just asked if the illustrations were included in the Kindle version, and yes, they absolutely are.
They are.
Yes.
And I think that if you tweak the sizing, I think the page layout works a little bit better in some cases than in others. But yeah, we worked long and hard on getting all the illustrations and the chapter design to work well together. I'll talk a little bit about the page design then. So this is what a page looks like. And pretty early on, we talked about just doing drop caps to make an attractive looking page. And somewhere along the way, I just thought, wouldn't it be fun if the drop caps actually kind of punctuate the story a little bit? And I always like stories that have a little more layers that you uncover, that you start to notice, and then you start to reveal that there are motifs that are sort of, playing out throughout the book, or it warrants a second view. And so, at the risk of decoding everything, it's something that I hope that people notice and then start to realize that the sequence of drop caps themselves actually tell a story. And so the way that came together was, it was as I was starting, once I decided to sort of design the drop caps. Sorry. Do you need to be here? Okay. We have a supporting player here who needs some attention. So once I decided to design them, I just assembled all the chapters together and just kind of summarized what was happening there, and realized that the first chapter and the last chapter both begin with the letter I. And so the letter I, Katie, we start out with Katie. She's isolated. She is she's cold, she's frozen, she's isolated. And I had thought that, I want to kind of play this out with some different motifs, but it just seemed perfect for her to be, for the first drop cap, just be a statement of isolation. And the frame, she's like enclosed by the frame. There's no augmentation or anything. She's just alone. She's stuck inside this frame. And so as you go forward, there are different elements are introduced, and you go through it. I'll talk a little bit about the sequence, but the symmetry of having the first one start with I and the last one start with I was really nice. And it sort of ends up with a sort of a resolution to the story, and the resolution to how the elements are playing together. So all the drop caps are here, and you'll notice that, and this is the sequence of them. You'll notice that they start simple, they get more complex, and then they kind of resolve into something that's a little more symmetrical. And they're all variations of these 5 elements. The frame, this is basically a piece of frost that I decided came to represent Katie. We have the raven, we have berries, which I think in the story and kind of visually, to me, they started to represent change or possibility, certainly festivity. And then we have the frost and the frozenness, the calcification, the lack of change, the lack of movement that Katie's experiencing at the beginning of the story. And so at the beginning, it just starts out with some introduction of some ice shards. And then by chapter 3, technically we meet Raven in chapter 2, but by chapter 3, Raven really makes his presence known. And we also start to notice a little bit about the berries. She notices berries in the town. And then chapter 3, she sort of like, Katie returns to her cabin, and we've got the frost. The frost is in the frame, but it's maybe starting to escape the frame a little bit. And then by chapter 4, we've got, if you wouldn't notice unless you really blow it up, but from this point forward, the raven is in every one of these, even if he's tiny. Like the raven is here, and Katie's little icon is here. So then it just becomes a little bit about the interplay of those 2 characters and how the berries and the frost start to swirl a little bit, start to interact a little bit. You've got a little bit of, they're starting to come together, they're getting to know each other. There's a little bit of, potentially the interplay of the 2, there's a little more symmetry to it being introduced. And then you have, a full union where there's real symmetry going on between all the elements. All the elements are, there's a strength in all the pieces are there, and they're interacting. And then it just continues to resolve where, as the story continues, which I won't give away in case you haven't read it, the story continues, just kind of in artistic terms. In the last frame, as I was playing with these last elements, Katie gets to a point of resolution where she's able to embrace art again. And something about the eye started to look a little bit like a Greek vase, like some of the characters against a Greek vase. And so there was a form to it, a formality to it, there's a symmetry to it, but it's also got the individuality. And so Katie sort of gets herself going again. And then we have Raven, who has that sort of magical ability to be both in frame and out of frame. So that was kind of the thinking behind the drop caps. And that's what we have. So there's not really more to that story.
Well, thank you. That was lovely. I love hearing about all the details. It looks beautiful, but then when you go into it, you really get to see all the, just all the intricacy. It's great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe we have a couple of questions if y'all are ready to take questions.
Sure, we can do that. And we have a little impromptu poll once the questions are done.
Oh, well, that sounds great. Well, we can end. That'll be a good thing to end on. The first question, and everyone just know if you want to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, we will make sure they get asked. The first question is, I believe for John. Mary Ann asks, how did this particular story come to you and get developed? So about sort of the inspiration. You talked a little bit about the beginning, but maybe a little more detail about the inspiration for the story and how you were able to write it. Oh, you're muted, John.
Sorry. Golly, that's a hard one because the first version of the story was written almost 20 years ago. I think a while back. I've always had a fascination with mythology and how certain stories sort of have echoes. And when you read the Raven story in the book, the Raven myth that is retold, it really echoes the Christmas story. It's in a surprising and really shocking way. It's like this one event has echoes that reach every culture in the world. And I'd read the Raven story in a book, and then I found another slightly different version in a different book, and then I saw a third version of it on television in the TV show Northern Exposure. So I had been absolutely delighted with that story and wanted to do something with it. And the idea of a story being something that heals somebody was something that has been on my mind a lot, really all my life. Story is important. It matters to us. It really does shape the world. There's a great quote that says the world is made of stories, not atoms. And I thoroughly believe that. The language of God is parable and story. In fact, I literally had a pastor friend not too long ago define religion as communal response to a story. So the idea that stories can change us and heal us was on my mind. And the idea of creation and how our ability to create is tied to our ability to feel. That all shaped the original story, as near as I can remember from 20 years ago.
Wonderful. Thank you. Madeline has her hand up. So if you want to unmute and ask your question, or you can type it in the chat, either one. Never sure how this works with the hand up. All right, maybe she'll type it in the chat. So yeah, I had a question. I am always so intrigued when writers choose to write about other artists. I find it a very daunting task to me, to the idea that you both have to create the art that is the book, but then you also have to create the art of your character. And so I would love if you would talk a little bit about that process. I know Carol said she, tried to imagine what kind of art the character would draw and sketch. And I think that's wonderful. But I'd love to, how did you go about thinking about that? What was the process like? How did you get inside an artist's mind, not just a person's mind, but an artist's mind specifically?
Oh, wow. It sort of just came to me. My tool is language, and I do try to write very visually. And I think that the urge to make comes from the same place. The same impulse that drives me to write is the same impulse that drives Carol to create, and it's certainly the drive that makes Katie create. I know that because I thought up Katie, so whatever I say is what's in her head. That's actually not true because I feel like Katie shoved the story in ways I didn't expect it to. But I think I was capturing a little bit of my own ability to turn, pain into art, or passion into art, or happiness into art. Whatever emotion you're feeling really strongly, you can shape. And I think that's the same with Katie.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense.
The question was about the drop caps, so we've already answered it.
Yeah, you've answered
it. I would add on to that, John, because part of the reason why John and I have partnered is we really love the other's art. And so we wanted to, neither of us is really the most practical person, but we really wanted to create a life where we were supporting each other's art. And so being an artist, expressing art, cultivating your art, doing your art, fielding your art, talking about your art. I mean, it's really a lot of what has brought us together. And so I always love when artists come. I think there's a theme in John's writings about people who are are artists, or they have some really passionate story, or they're looking for meaning. They're scientists, they're artists, they're cultural anthropologists, they're people who are really seeking meaning. And I think it sort of spins, which is part of the reason why it was kind of fun for us to actually construct them together, that it was really, to me, it's all of a piece.
Well, we have a question continuing on to talk about the collaboration from John Yarrow. Do you all
Oh, hey,
dive into
John.
each
I know
other's
you.
area of expertise? And if so, how does that work? So continuing along the same lines about speaking about the collaboration.
I'm going to jump ahead, and we originally started doing these books as gifts, and I would write a story, then Carol would do illustrations, and for some reason that to this day escapes me, we decided that just getting the books done for Christmas every year wasn't hard enough. So instead, we were going to do a story where Carol would do illustrations first, just a series of illustrations, and then I would have to come up with a story to match them.
Mhm.
And that actually worked, believe it or not. And it was fun to look at images and try to weave a narrative out of them. Now, Carol actually had a narrative in mind when she did the sketches. I worked from thumbnails originally, then I tried to include them all. And it turned out later it was not even remotely the story that Carol had in mind, or apparently even close. But it was Christmassy. It again involved somebody who's hurting and finding some healing and peace. It's more it's sort of an Indiana Jones type adventure with a historical mystery behind it, which was not even close to what Carol had in mind.
Well, I will. Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Um, I think also the fact that Carol is an artist is what has put art in the first book. Um, the idea that it's a book that's about art, or the fact that there was going to be art in it made it kind of natural that there would be art in the story as well as art illustrating the story. Sorry, Carol, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it was really fun to start to explore different ways of making the story, of outlining the story, of storytelling. And that was when I came back from that trip. I went to a trip to basically Central Europe, and I think I knew we were going to do a book, and I started just like collecting travel type things. And I thought it was really funny to I just laid out a bunch of ideas thinking he'll like pick and choose from among them and create a narrative from that. But it was fun because there was sort of like, there was the basis of a trip. So there were pictures and I had stories to talk about, and I'd gone to Prague and Budapest and Vienna, and those places are just really rich and inspiring. So it was fun to try to get at the storytelling that way as well.
And I did work Budapest into the story.
You did.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think our last question that we have is a great place to end on, and then we can turn it over for your poll. Zach asks,
Oh, hey,
since
Zach.
this is a story that was originally part of a collection, what's up next? So can you talk about your upcoming projects and what you have coming out next?
Sure. I think that'll lead
Segue.
nicely into Carol's poll.
Perfect.
The original collection was going to be 4 stories, which I thought were short stories, and Lou Aronica thought were novels. Again, my stuff does tend to be a little bit on the longish side. So the next one is a ghost story that also has to do about healing and story. It's about a cultural anthropologist who's also a grieving widow living in London. And she's trying to be one of the first cultural anthropologists ever to track an urban legend back to its original source. Urban legends are always something that happens to a friend of a friend, or somebody 2 streets over and a second cousin of the butcher, but never somebody specific. So she wants to trace it all the way back to the story, to the beginning of the story, and find out where it came from. And as she does, she finds herself caught up in an urban legend that seems to date all the way back to the end of World War II. about a very lonely British soldier who died on a ship in World War II and has been trying to get home for Christmas ever since. And when she's confronted with the impossible, she has to find faith in order to solve a mystery. That's next year's. It's called Christmas Past. The original version, by the way, was called "I'll Be Home for Christmas," which turns out to be the title of a whole lot of books. So we couldn't use that. But Christmas Past, I think, works a lot better. It shapes the mood of the story. It's a ghost story. It's a little bit spooky, but it's certainly Christmassy. And Carol's been working on a cover for that already. In fact, the metadata, the stuff that goes in the bookstore catalogs, is due this coming Friday for a book that comes out next Christmas. Mm-hmm. So this year's Christmas book, Raven Wakes the World, is already out. And next year's will be out next Christmas.
So we wanted to do an impromptu poll, couple different takes on the story. And so I guess we could just use the chat, or you can go off mute and say whatever you want, or put it in the Q&A, whatever. If you have a preference between the two, we'd love to hear it. And then I'll say a tiny bit about the illustrations this time are going to be photo collages. And since part of it takes place in the 40s and part of it takes place in the nows, just wanted to give a sense of, there's almost a sense of photojournalism, but it's a ghost story. So it should be fun kind of putting together imagery that implies, sort of documentation of fact. And yet there's the whole question of like how, but it's a ghost story as well. So I'd love to hear any takes you have on sort of preference.
Thank you, Marianne. Marianne is one of my oldest and dearest friends.
Someone's added they like the blue cover, and I'll have to say I agree. I think the blue cover is stunning. They're both lovely, but from a thumbnail perspective, the blue cover works.
So this is the tricky part too. When you think about if you're shopping online, it really just looks about this big. If that. So it really changes it. So you have to think about it in terms of, if I walked into a store and saw it across the room, what would it look like? What would it look like if I pick it up and I hold it right next to me? What was it going to look like if the size of a postage stamp in search results?
Do you have other thoughts? The second stands out more as a thumbnail, Zach says.
Mm-hmm. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, the red pops. I'm still more drawn to the blue one, but
Mm-hmm.
You can't easily read the red version on ads.
That is true.
Yeah, some of the writing up at the top is a little harder to see in the red version.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see the picture better in the red one. So you're not going to get a definitive answer from this crew, it seems.
We're going to get the book clubs, I see. That's where we are. See, there's the challenge of it. The one on the left is more mysterious and more daunting.
Right. I guess the question is which one matches the mood of the book more, because they do kind of seem like different moods.
It's a little spooky. Definitely a mystery that with many layers that gets solved gradually. And it's also romantic. Being a Christmas story.
And I love the painterliness of the one on the left, but the one on the right, because I was going for that sort of irony of trying to document things that might not be factual, I ended up with Life magazine covers. And so this one sort of evokes Life magazine and the attempt to document the mystical. So, well, thanks everybody for weighing in. We'll see where we end up.
By the way, thanks for having us.
Other comments being added. You have lots of other comments being added if you want to make sure you read those.
Yeah.
All right.
Pretty torn.
Hey, Bill.
But thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you to the audience for bearing with us during our little issues at the beginning. Carol, if you want to, you're still sharing your screen.
Yeah, I'm trying to capture the comments.
Oh, good. Yes. But
There's a question about the signing, and I'm typing an answer in the chat.
Yeah,
you can drop me an email at john@johnadcox.com or contact Eagle Eye Bookshop, and Carol and I will drop back by there and sign the copies that are there. But I'm typing that in the chat as well.
Yes, I've put the link to purchase the book from Eagle Eye in the chat, and I will also I will share it with the recording of this event tomorrow. So if you missed some, if you were kicked off a little bit and missed some, I will share all of this information tomorrow as well as the recording. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks, John. Thanks, Carol. And again, thanks for dealing with our few little issues at the beginning, but I think you'll all agree that it was worth it. So I will.
Thanks all of you guys. And I hope, Joe, if you're watching, I hope you feel better.
Yes, I think Joe is watching. He's tuned in. So if you do not see the link in the chat, I will share it on our Facebook tomorrow. But thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
You.